1 Maccabees chapter 11. Ptolemy invades Syria. Then the king of Egypt gathered great forces, like the sand by the seashore, and many ships, and he tried to get possession of Alexander's kingdom by trickery, and add it to his own kingdom. He set out for Syria with peaceable words, and the people of the towns opened their gates to him and went to meet him, for King Alexander had commanded them to meet him, since he was Alexander's father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the towns, he stationed forces as a garrison in each town. When he approached Ascalon, they showed him the burned-out temple of Dagon, and Ascalon and its suburbs destroyed, and the corpses lying about, and the charred bodies of those whom Jonathan had burned in the war, for they had piled them in heaps along his route. They also told the king what Jonathan had done, to throw blame on him, but the king kept silent. Jonathan met the king at Joppa with pomp, and they greeted one another and spent the night there. And Jonathan went with the king as far as the river called Eleutheris. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So King Ptolemy gained control of the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea. And he kept devising wicked designs against Alexander. He sent envoys to King Dimitrius, saying, "Come, let us make a covenant with each other, and I will give you in marriage my daughter, who was Alexander's wife, and you shall reign over your father's kingdom." I now regret that I gave him my daughter, for he has tried to kill me. He threw blame on Alexander because he coveted his kingdom. So he took his daughter away from him and gave her to Dimitrius. He was estranged from Alexander, and their enmity became manifest. Then Ptolemy entered Antioch and put down the crown of Asia. Thus he put 2 crowns on his head, the crown of Egypt and that of Asia. Now King Alexander was in Sicilia at that time, because the people of that region were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he came against him in battle. Ptolemy marched out and met him with a strong force and put him to flight. So Alexander fled into Arabia to find protection there, and King Ptolemy was triumphant. Subdale the Arab cut off the head of Alexander and sent it to Ptolemy. But King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his troops were in the strongholds were killed by the inhabitants of the strongholds. So Dimitrius became king in 167th year. Jonathan's diplomacy. In those days, Jonathan assembled the Judeans to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war to use against it. But certain renegades who hated their nation went to the king and reported to him that Jonathan was besieging the citadel. When he heard this, he was angry, and as soon as he heard it, he set out and came to Ptolemais. And he wrote Jonathan not to continue the siege, but to meet him for a conference at Ptolemais as quickly as possible. When Jonathan heard this, he gave orders to continue the siege. He chose some of the elders of Israel and some of the priests, and put himself in danger. For he went to the king at Ptolemais, taking silver and gold and clothing and numerous other gifts, and he won his favor. Although certain renegades of his nation kept making complaints against him, the king treated him as his predecessors had treated him. He exalted him in the presence of all his friends. He confirmed him in the high priesthood and in as many other honors as he had formerly had, and caused him to be reckoned among his chief friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to free Judea and the 3 districts of Samaria from tribute, and promised him 300 talents. The king consented, and wrote a letter to Jonathan about all these things. Its contents were as follows: King Dimitrius, to his brother Jonathan, and to the nation of the Jews, greetings. This copy of the letter that we wrote concerning you to our kinsman Lasthenes, we have all written to you also, so that you may know what it says. King Dimitrius, to his father Lasthenes, greetings. We have determined to do good to the nation of the Jews, who are our friends, and fulfill their obligations to us, because of the goodwill they show toward us. We have confirmed as their possession both the territory of Judea and the 3 districts of Aphareima and Lydda and Rathamin. The latter, with all the region bordering them, were added to Judea from Samaria. To all those who offer sacrifice in Jerusalem, we have granted release from the royal taxes that the king formerly received from them each year, from the crops of the land and the fruit of the trees, and the other payments henceforth due to us of the tithes, and the taxes due to us, and the salt pits, and the crown taxes due to us. From all these we shall grant them release, and not one of these grants shall be cancelled from this time on forever. Now therefore take care to make a copy of this, and let it be given to Jonathan to put up in a conspicuous place on the holy mountain. The intrigue of Trif. When King Dimitrius saw that the land was quiet before him, and that there was no opposition to him, he dismissed all his troops, all of them to their own homes, except the foreign troops that he had recruited from the islands of the nations. So all the troops who had served under his predecessors hated him. A certain Trif had formerly been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the troops were grumbling against Dimitrius. So he went to Imalcu, the Arab, who was bringing up Antiochus, the young son of Alexander, and insistently urged him to hand Antiochus over to him to become king in place of his father. He also reported to Imalcu what Dimitrius had done, and told of the hatred that the troops of Dimitrius had for him. He stayed there many days. Now Jonathan sent to King Dimitrius the request that he remove the troops of the citadel from Jerusalem, and the troops in the strongholds, for they kept fighting against Israel. And Dimitrius sent this message back to Jonathan: Not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will confer great honor on you and your nation, if I find an opportunity. Now then, you will do well to send me men who will help me, for all my troops have revolted. So Jonathan sent 3,000 stalwart men to him at Antioch. And when they came to the king rejoiced at their arrival. Then the people of the city assembled within the city to the number of 120,000, and they wanted to kill the king, but the king fled into the palace. Then the people of the city seized the main streets of the city and began to fight. So the king called the Jews to his aid, and they all rallied around him and then spread out through the city. And they killed on that day about 100,000. They set fire to the city and seized a large amount of spoil on that day and saved the king. When the people of the city saw that the Jews had gained control of the city as they pleased, their courage failed, and they cried out to the king with this entreaty: "Grant us peace, and make the Jews stop fighting against us and our city." And they threw down their arms and made peace. So the Jews gained glory in the sight of the king and of all the people in his kingdom, and they returned to Jerusalem with a large amount of spoil. So King Dimitrius sat on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was quiet before him. But he broke his word about all that he had promised. He became estranged from Jonathan, and did not repay the favors that Jonathan had done him, but treated him very harshly. Trif seizes power. After this, Trif returned, and with him the young boy Antiochus, who began to reign and put on the crown. All the troops that Dimitrius had discharged gathered around him. They fought against Dimitrius, and he fled and was routed. Trif captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. Then the young Antiochus wrote to Jonathan, saying, "I confirm you in the high priesthood, and set you over the 4 districts, and make you one of the king's friends." He also sent him gold plates and a table service, and granted him the right to drink from gold cups, and dress in purple, and wear a gold buckle. He appointed Jonathan's brother Simon governor from the ladder of Tyre to the borders of Egypt. Campaigns of Jonathan and Simon. Then Jonathan set out and travelled beyond the river and among the towns, and all the army of Syria gathered to him as allies. When he came to Ascalon, the people of the city met him and paid him honor. From there he went to Gaza, but the people of Gaza shut him out. So he besieged it and burned its suburbs with fire and plundered them. Then the people of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan, and he made peace with them, and took the sons of their rulers as hostages, and sent them to Jerusalem. And he passed through the country as far as Damascus. Then Jonathan heard that the officers of Dimitrius had come to Kadesh in Galilee with a large army, intending to remove him from office. He went to meet them, but left his brother Simon in the country. Simon encamped before Bethsur and fought against it for many days and hemmed it in. Then they asked him to grant them terms of peace, and he did so. He removed them from there, took possession of the town, and set a garrison over it. Jonathan and his army encamped by the waters of Gennesaret. Early in the morning they marched to the plain of Hazor, and there in the plain the army of the foreigners met him. They had set an ambush against him in the mountains, but they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in ambush emerged from their places and joined battle. all the men with Jonathan fled. Not one of them was left except Mattathias, son of Absalom, and Judas, son of Chalphi, commanders of the forces of the army. Jonathan tore his clothes, put dust on his head, and prayed. Then he turned back to the battle against the enemy and routed them, and they fled. When his men who were fleeing saw this, they returned to him and joined him in the pursuit as far as Kadesh to their camp, and there they encamped. As many as 3,000 of the foreigners fell that day, and Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. This is the word of the Lord.